What's going on, guys? This is Greg Coleman, otherwise known as Mr. Elementary Math, and I'm so excited about our training. And you know why, right? You do know. It's because you guys voted for this particular training, and it is 3 ways to make math fun virtually. So I'm just going to share 3 ways. And although I'm talking about virtual teaching, even if you're doing face-to-face instruction, you still can use some of these tips to meet the needs of your kids in class. Sounds good? So a few things to keep in mind as we go through this quick training because it's not going to be long at all. First things first is if I give an example, because this training is for kindergarten through 5th grade teachers. If I give an example, say for example, kindergarten example, 5th grade, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade teachers, I want you to think about how you can meet the needs of your kids by just that same example. So think about, as I'm going through this, think about how or what changes you need to make to meet the needs of your specific kids. Don't get caught up on, oh, that was just an example for kindergarten or 2nd grade or 4th grade or whatever, okay? Sounds good? All right. The other thing is this. My recommendation is that when you are teaching virtually, that is using platforms such as Zoom, or you can be using Google Meets or any other platforms like that. My suggestion is that you work with small groups of students and not all of your students. So if you have 20 students, not all 20 of them on one Zoom during this time. I suggest that you break up your students into small groups of no more than 4, the max 5 students on that call. This way, you can meet the needs of your kids, you can really engage them, and you can really ask them great questions and get feedback rather from them. Sounds good? So those are some things to keep in mind as we're going through this, all right? So now let's start with tip number 1. And tip number 1 is to engage students in powerful math conversations. And we know how powerful or important math conversations are during our regular face-to-face instruction. And they are even more important now virtually because we may not be there in person with our kids. So we have to hear them explain. We need to listen for them to justify. We need to ask them a lot of questions. And we need to give them time to show their work. All right. So one way you can do that is by doing problem solving tasks. So I'm going to discuss how to use my solve and explain problem solving tasks to do just that. And some of you guys pretty much probably already have them and they look like these. This is just an example of one of the solve and explain tasks. They look just like these and they are different colors and different ones. However, I have cut them out and actually not cut them out. I put a screenshot. So you're going to see a screenshot that's placed on a PowerPoint. Whichever method works best for you, make it do what it do. Sounds good? So if you want to hold them up like this and talk through it with your kids, you can do that. Or if you want to replicate what I did by taking a screenshot of that individual card, putting it on a PowerPoint slide, you're more than welcome to do so. So let's go ahead and jump into that right now. So here we have an example of a kindergarten problem solving task. One thing to keep in mind is when working with kindergarten and 1st grade students with these type of tasks, I would just have them do it verbally. So they would have to share out what they see and what they understand with me verbally. You can do the same for grades 2 and up as well. However, I would not necessarily include a writing component where they had any paper and they had to write anything because they're little ones and we want to keep them engaged and get as much face-to-face time with them. Sounds good? So here we have a problem solving task that involves counting and understanding one more and one less. So pretty much the question says how many dots and add one more dot and how many are there now? So I would ask my 4 or 5 students on there, I would say, how many do you see? And I would give them a moment. I would say, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, guys. And I want you to tell me after the 10 seconds, but I'm going to call on you. So once you have your answer, bubble your lips. And I would count out my 10 seconds in my brain. And then after that, I would say, all right, I'm going to start with, and then you say student 1. So tell me, how many do you see? And then I would ask a different student. Then I would ask another student. Then I would ask my 4th student. So then I would ask just a random student, how did they see them? And then some students may say they see 3 in one section. They may see 2 in another section, and they say 3 in the bottom. And that makes 8. All right. And then I would ask just a random student to say, add one more. Now, how many do you see now? So I would just pick on a student to do that. All right. So one thing is to keep your kids engaged by randomly selecting them throughout this so that they can always, you make sure they're always paying attention and always listening. And you have to really set ground rules and important routines and procedures when doing all of this work anyway, especially we do that face to face. So why not do that virtually? We have to set rules and guidelines about how we work through Zooms or meetings online and how that looks and how we respect our community and our classmates. All right. So that's an example of the problem solving task for kinder. Now I'll have another example. So here we have another example. This would not be for kindergarten. This would be for grades 2 or 3. It says, what could it be? Compare 3-digit numbers. So the way I would do this is for my 4 or 5 students that are in my call, basically I would make sure that they have a piece of paper and a pencil to write with. So I would make sure that they have those tools before they engage in this, and they would have to answer this question. What base 10 model could go inside the box to make it true? So I would have each one of them draw at least 2 different models. They would have to draw 2 different models to represent that. And after they did that, so I would give them maybe like 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. If they need longer, that's absolutely fine. After they've drawn it, and while they're waiting, while they're actually figuring it out and drawing it, you may be able to play some music, something light in the background, and you can stop the music. And after you stop the music, they know it's time to share out. All right. So once they share out, you give each student an opportunity to hold up their response. So they should have something on their piece of paper, and they're going to hold up what they have on their papers, and they're going to discuss it. Okay. And then you're going to ask the other students, do they agree, and why they agree. And then you'll give another student an opportunity to share out what they have. Sounds good? The thing that I love about these particular questions, specifically this one, is it's very open-ended, and it's just not just one answer that is the answer. And that's what I love about the solve and explain task. So it can really engage students. So some of them do have just one answer, but some have multiple answers. So that's really an important process when we engage in students through the work of math. We want to open up the question just a little bit more so that they really can see and really discuss and justify. It really can have some powerful discussions as we ask students questions like, do you agree with what your classmate said? Or why do you disagree? Or tell me more. Or how did you get that? So these really work to do that. So that's just an example of problem solving. Now we're going to move on to tip number 2. So tip number 2 is to provide opportunities for student choice. And we know how important student choice is because we as adults, we love to have choice, even if it's limited choice, right? So student choice is really, really important as well. And there are different ways that you can engage students through student choice. You can do digital games, and there are many different digital games out there, and you can give them a choice of which move they would like to take. Or you could even give students choice on who goes next. So I'm going to show you both ways using one of my digital games. I'm going to show you how it will work if students got to select what they wanted to pick, and then how it will work if students, once they answered the question, they were able to pass it off and say, okay, next goes the next student. Sounds good? Let's go ahead and jump into this 4th grade example using place value. To get started with this, all you would need would be a dry erase board, or you can even use a piece of paper. I like dry erase boards because you can erase it and use it all year long, as opposed to paper and just messing up paper and having to recycle. I just like to save the earth, so dry erase board with the marker helps. So you place each player in their own cell. So it's player 1, player 2, player 3, and player 4. And this dry erase board is just to keep score of the points that your students will make. All right. So like I said, here we have a place value understanding game. We're going to press play, and then your students have an opportunity. So say, for example, we had Greg. So Greg would go first. They would select which option they would want. So there are 4 options. There's true or false. There's pick 2. There's choose it. And there's solve it. So Greg would select which one Greg would want. So Greg's going to say true or false A. So you select that one, and the question is 1500s plus 4 tens is equal to 154. So if Greg answers that question right, he would get 10 points. If he does not answer it right, he gets no points. Sounds good? So I'm Greg, so I'm going to say that is false. That is not the correct answer. We're going to check our answer, and that is right. It's false. The answer is 1,540. All right? So like I said, I would place 10 points as a teacher for Greg, And then I would let Greg actually pick the next students that's going to go. So I put Greg as the first one. So Greg would pick the next student that's going to go, and Greg may pick Amy. So Amy went next, and Amy would select what she wanted to. So Amy might say, okay, I want to do pick 2C. So she'll pick 2C. Amy would go, she would read the question, and then she would answer the question. Like I said, if she got the question right, she would get 10 points. If she did not, she would get no points for that. So the question reads, find two numbers greater than the mystery number. So let's see, we have to figure out the mystery number. So the mystery number looks like it's 85,605. 85,605. All right, so I have to find two numbers that are greater than that number. So my choice would be, well, if Amy picked it, she would say B or C, and she would check her answer, and then you would check it, and then she got it right. You give her 10 points, so you would keep score on your dry erase board like so, giving Amy 10 points. And you would keep going in much the same way, giving Amy a choice to select who would be the next player, and then the next player would select what they want to. All right, so that's just an example of how this would look by using this kind of mechanism. Now let's move on to a first grade example using place value, of course. So let's move on to that right now. Here we have a first grade example of place value, and this game is just a little different than the other in terms of how it's set up. All right, so this is not so much student choice in terms of kids get to select which question they want. However, students do get an opportunity to select who goes next. And one thing that you want to keep in mind for your younger grade kids is to place expectations ahead of time about how to select and how to be fair about who to select now, and not just picking your friends, but being fair to all of our classmates or all of our kids in our small group. So remember, we're working in small groups on these activities. So we're not having any more than 4 or 5 students. So the materials that you'll need to get started, just as a teacher, you'll need a digital game. You'll also need a dry erase board, and you need to make sure you have a space for each of the players. There are 4 players, and you'll need a dry erase marker. Students that get the answer correct, they will get 1 point. Students that do not get any points. All right. So we'll go ahead and press play, and then you as the teacher, you would select the first student. So say, for example, you selected Sheila. You give Sheila a moment to answer the question, and if you wanted to team them up, you can also do that. You could do it either individually or in teams. But as teams, they would have to have an open discussion together on Zoom or Google Meets. However, if you did it individually, that might be a easier way to get started. So you just pick Sheila. She selects whether that those base 10 images are equal to the number 22. And then once Sheila gives her answer, you ask her why. So make sure they explain their answer as they're going through this. So Sheila will explain why she believed that the answer was no. And then you as the teacher, you would just select no. And since Sheila was correct when she said no and her explanation sounded great, you would give Sheila 1 point. So you would write it on the board just like that, and just keep the board to record points. And now it would be Sheila's turn to select who would be the next student. So she would select the next student. Say, for example, that student might be Bryce. So she selected Bryce. Bryce would answer the next question. So he would have to fill in the blank and find the response for the blank. He would have to figure out what it is. If he said it was 7, you ask him why he believes the number or the answer is 7. You select 7. And you say, well, Bryce, that was a nice try. However, the answer is 5, because we see that 10 and 5 ones, one group of 10 and 5 ones is the same as 15. And because of that, you just don't have to give any points. You just keep it just like that. All right. So Bryce would get a chance to pick the next student that goes. So throughout this, make sure you're encouraging. Make sure, other students are encouraging as well. So we're in a small group, so you should really make sure that all kids encourage each other throughout the process, even when they get the answer wrong. Okay, because this is a learning experience. Sounds good? Now it's time to move to tip number 3. Tip 3 is to engage your students through opportunities for friendly competition. We know how fun competition is. However, it is turned up just a little bit during this tip. And we did competition during our last activity. However, the focus wasn't on competition. It was more on building and student choice. This one is building specifically on competition. And I'm going to share that through the lens of task cards, and I'm going to show you how to do it through a paper game that I kind of tweak to make it a little different. So you guys may have some task cards like this or whatever task cards. These are my Flip and Go task cards. And basically what I did is took a screenshot and placed it on a PowerPoint. And you'll notice also the face-off game is a paper game that looks just like this. And I'm going to show you how I would adapt that and screenshot it to use it on in a digital format to make it just a little easier, and you guys can use it in the same way and replicate what I did. It's completely up to you. So remember, the first one is the task card challenge, and you may have a variety of task cards. Use some of the ideas here to engage your students. So let's go ahead and jump in. Since we're building engagement through student-friendly competitions, the object of this game is to be the student with the most points, all right? So this is called the task card challenge, and the way you can set this up ahead of time is make sure if you have at least 4 students, say for example you have 4 students in your small group, make sure you have a screenshot at least 12 different task cards. So there's one task card per screen like you see right now, okay? So once again, if you have 4 students in your small group, have at least 12 task cards, all right? So it will give a variety of approaches and your students will get at least 3 turns, all right? So remember, each answer is worth 1 point and the object is to get the most points. So the 2 things that students can do in this, either they can pass, so they can pass if they don't know the answer. So they may read the question and say, I don't know the answer, so they get a choice to pass, or they can answer it. So remember, students can either pass or they can answer the question. If they choose to pass, that's absolutely fine. They get to select who the next student will be to answer it. And if they don't get it correct, however, and they choose to answer it and they get it wrong, what will happen is another student gets a chance to actually answer that question. And if that student gets it right, they will get 2 points. They'll get double the points, all right? So you may be thinking, okay, Greg, I hear you, and that sounds good, but how does that look? So I'm going to show you right now. So the first items that you'll need as a teacher, you'll need to make sure that you have a dry erase board and a dry erase marker like we did before so that you can keep score. The other thing that you'll need handy is you'll need to make sure you have the answer key written down on a Post-it note or whatever you have, because you're going to have to make sure that the kids answer the right questions, all right? And you'll have to keep track of that. So let's go ahead and jump in. So say, for example, I'm Greg. I'm the first student that answers. Remember, I have 2 choices. I could either pass or I can answer. So say, for example, I looked at this and I said, oh, no, I'm going to pass this. So I'll pass this to Cheryl. So Cheryl will answer the question, and Cheryl could either answer or she can pass. So Cheryl chooses to answer it. So she'll say, okay, what number is 10 more than the amount below? So Cheryl looks and she says the answer is C, is 89. So you'll ask Cheryl, how did she get that answer? She'll explain it and say, for example, the answer is right. C is right because that's 10 more. You will say, okay, Cheryl, you got it right. You get 1 point. So you'll write the 1 point that Cheryl gets on your dry erase board like so. And then Cheryl gets to select who will be the next student. So Cheryl says, okay, Bryce will go next. So Bryce has 2 options. He'll read the question and he'll say he'll either what? Pass, or he can answer the question. So Bryce chooses to answer this question. It says, what is the difference? So Bryce looks and says, what is the difference? And Bryce says, the difference is B. And you'll say, all right, Bryce, well, tell us how you got that. And Bryce said, he still believed that that was the answer. So you'll say, okay, great, as the teacher. You'll say, great, Bryce. That was a nice try. However, that is not the answer. Since you didn't get that answer correct, then you get to pick who will get a try, who will be able to try to answer that question correctly. All right. So remember, during this, we're going to make sure our students, we're going to build an encouragement, make sure our students encourage each other, because even if they get it wrong, there's still something to be learned in wrong answers. We learn, and me, for example, I learn from my mistakes all the time. So we're not downing kids, and we're going to make sure that our students do not down kids if they get the wrong answer. All right. That's very important. So since Bryce didn't get it right, the next student, and he chose to answer it, the next student that he chose or selects will get a chance to answer it. So he says, okay, I want to give it to James. So James gets a chance to answer the question. So James will say, all right, the correct answer is A. So since James got that answer right and it was passed because it was incorrectly answered prior to, you would give James 2 points. All right. So James would get 2 points since he would be that next player. So you give him 2 points. Make sure you record those 2 points on your dry erase board. All right. So after James answers that question, he gets to pick the next student. So the next student would read the question. Remember, there's two choices, either answer or pass. So that student would determine whether they want to answer or pass. So they would answer the question. You would ask them how they get it, how they got that answer, and then they would answer that, and they got it right. They get 1 point. If they get it wrong, then you give another student an opportunity to answer the question. Sounds good? Is that clear? All right, so that is the task card challenge. Now it's time to move on to face off. The object of this game is to get the most points, and each correctly answered question is worth 1 point. Once again, each correctly answered question is worth 1 point. All right, so this is the face-off game, and you see a digital version. However, all I did was did a screenshot. So this is the paper version. All I did was screenshot the game board, which you see on the left-hand side. And for those who are not familiar with face-off, these are the answers to all the questions. So it's either 6, 10, 12, or 24 would be the answers to all of the questions. All right. So you'll screenshot just 2 questions on the right hand side. All right. So you'll have your game board and 2 questions on the right hand side. What you'll do is you'll give, since you have 4 students in a small group, you will give 2 students an opportunity to answer 1 question and the other 2 students to answer the other question. So you as a teacher, what you'll need to make sure that you have a dry erase board with your students' names on it. So in this case, we have our 4 students, Maggie, Bernard, and we have Will and Sherry. Maggie and Bernard are going to answer question 2, and Will and Sherry will answer question 4. All right. So you'll give your students at least anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. If you feel like you need to give your students less time or more time, is completely up to you. That's just a recommended amount of time to give your students to actually answer the question. And your students will need a piece of paper and a pencil to write their answers. And once they have their answers written after that 1 minute time frame, they will circle it and they will hold it up. All right. So this is how we get started. We'll say, okay, Will and like I said, Maggie and Bernard, you're doing question 2. Will and Sherry, you're doing question 4. You have 1 minute to get started. You will have 1 minute to complete the answer or get the answer to this question. So you give them 1 minute. After the 1 minute, you'll say, pencils down, papers up. So what will happen is they'll have their papers up, and you'll give each student an opportunity to discuss what they think the answer is. So Maggie answered question number 2, and Bernard. So Maggie may say she believes the answer is 12, and Bernard may say he believes the answer is 6. You ask them why they believe that. And then you have Will and Sherry, which are the next ones. They had question 4. What's the missing digit? So both Will and Sherry say is the missing digit is 6. So you'll ask them to explain their thinking. And then what you'll do is once they explain their thinking, all 4 have explained their thinking, then you will flip to a slide that looks like this. And it'll just have an arrow that points to the correct answer. All right. So since we had Maggie, she got the answer correct because she said the answer was 12. She'll get a point. Bernard said the answer was 6, so he was not correct. Will and Sherry were both correct in that they thought the answers were both 6. So you give each of them points. You record them on your dry erase board just like this, and you'll continue in another round in much the same way. So you'll just keep this game board, which is on the left-hand side. You'll switch out the game card questions, just a screenshot. Just screenshot 2 different questions on the right-hand side, and you'll continue to do the same thing. Give your students time to answer it, record their answer. You're going to say pencils down, papers up. They'll share it. They'll discuss why they think that's the answer. You show the answer, give them a point, all right, or not. So that is Face Off. Hope this is a game that you can use in your virtual learning and it helps you out. That's Face Off. So this wraps up my 3 tips for making math fun virtually. So just to recap on what we talked about today, the tip number 1 was to engage students in powerful math conversations. Tip number 2 is to provide opportunities for student choice. And tip number 3 is to provide opportunities for friendly competition. once again, provide opportunities for friendly competitions. So those were my 3 tips. And if you need any resources, you can go ahead and check those resources out in my TPT store. You may have task cards that you already have. Go ahead and use those. You may have games that you already have. Go ahead and use those. All right. But if you need any resources, you can go ahead and head to my TPT store and they will be available for you so that you can use them in your classroom. Remember, I want you to consider, like I said at the beginning, think about how you can meet the needs of your kids. And if you need to modify and make any changes to these activities, go ahead and do that. I just wanted to share how in many cases that we have paper-based or PDF activities, how we can really transition those and make those fun for our students to play and use with us during this virtual experience. So I hope you learned a lot. I hope you enjoyed this short training on virtual math. You have an awesome week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, Math Fam.